What up everybody, Matt Field here at the 2024 PRI show, and we are standing in front of my brand new C8 drift car. I wanted to show you guys just a little bit of the electronics package that this car has, because we literally just finished the wiring and the electronics right before it went to the show. So in the next couple of days, make sure you guys look forward to seeing some dyno videos, some systems checks videos. We're gonna be doing a little bit of more informative video with Jay on the laptop explaining to you guys and also me how the new Voodoo Pro works, because there's a ton of stuff that this car has that makes it one of the most technologically advanced drift cars in the world right now. This car, it's an LS-based engine, but it's not your average Joe LS-based engine. It's a tall deck LSR block, raised cam, 16:1 compression. Grom Racing went and developed a ton of different things for this, and it is an absolutely wild, naturally aspirated, 1,000 horsepower engine. And then we're gonna add nitrous on top of it. So, of course, that means that we wanna make sure we have a lot of protections and fail-safes built into the ECU and the electronic system to make sure we don't smoke this really expensive, extremely exotic engine. So, one of the big things and one of the highlights of this is actually the 8 individual O2 sensors. Now, on my previous car, I had EGT sensors all ran through the Link, which interpreted what cylinder pressure and what kind of temperature we're gonna have, and if you have a spark plug wire failure, you're like, oh, it's cylinder 7, you can totally tell. This is a little bit different because I really feel that there's a ton of maximization left on the table if you're not doing individual cylinder fueling. We don't know how this intake manifold is gonna flow. Got no idea. It's got 2 massive Wilson 4500 throttle bodies and a big plenum, but is air gonna be happy and going here equally as much as it's going into this cylinder? We really don't know. But because the Link can run 8 O2 sensors, we have an O2 sensor and this is a wideband O2 sensor in every single tube. And you can see Borla built this exhaust. It's 2 1/4 primaries into a 5-inch out on the collector. And each one of the O2 sensors is placed very specific. Jay said, make sure it's within this range to this range from the back of the head. Try to keep them all lined up and so that there doesn't get moisture on them and they're not gonna rattle and fall off. If you look up in the very front corners on both sides, you can see all of the CAN lambda boxes. And it's cool that Link makes a CAN lambda box because if you look at an actual O2 sensor, I don't know, 6 wires or something like that, you can't run all 6 wires for 8 sensors directly to the ECU. So you plug them into the CAN lambda box, you get power, and then what gets spit out is all transmitted on 2 wires. So all of this information is going to live on the CAN network that Link specifically has, and it'll be communicated back to the ECU. Then that Voodoo Pro will process it. I don't know, it's literally voodoo magic what's happening in there. I'm not a software engineer, you know, I'm not a hardware engineer either. But all I know is one way or another we'll be able to transmit that data on the CAN network specifically to the AIM dash, and the dash will be able to display if we have any sort of problem. Oh, O2 sensors seeing that this cylinder is lean or rich. Is it an injector? Is it a plug wire? We'll be able to figure it out. So that saves you a ton of time, because if you can imagine, if we have a misfire on this engine, where do you start? Right, so we want the Link to be able to explain to us where to start and what steps to take to solve it. Something else that's different about this is the drive-by-wire setup. So you can see right here, that is actually a Bosch drive-by-wire motor that is put into a billet case. And what's cool about this is, this has, like I said, these are 4500 Dominator carb throttle bodies, 4-barrel throttle bodies, 2 of them. So figuring out how to make that drive-by-wire was pretty interesting. And I'll show you. This is called a bell crank throttle linkage. And basically what it means is there's a rod that goes to each throttle body, and then they're tied together with this. And then of course, the Link is going to be able to run this drive-by-wire motor. So it makes something that's very much traditionally cable-driven only into an electronic motor. And for me, I've been using drive-by-wire on all my cars for, I don't know, the past 8 or 9 years, and I see huge benefits from it. Perfect example, you know how hard it is to get something to idle with a massive camshaft? It's a V8, talking push rod V8. If you have a big cam, it's tough to get it to idle because there's no vacuum. So then you're cracking the throttle body a little bit. Then the thing wants to run away. And when you close the throttles, it wants to fall on its face. So what we're doing is that there's no TPS sensors, there's no idle air control valves in the throttle bodies. The ECU is going to be able to control all of the idle, the high idle, low idle, coming off throttle, fuel enrichment, warm up, cold start, all of that through this drive-by-wire motor right here. And of course, that's a ton of tables and a ton of data that needs to get overlaid on top of each other. Coolant temp means this is cold start. That means that's this. I want to come off throttle, it needs to go to this map. So we're hopeful that this drive-by-wire motor will really smooth things out, and then you're fully relying on the electronics of the car to control the idle and driving around the pits and all of that. Although wheel speed sensors are not legal in Formula Drift, we get that because there's a whole traction control side of things. You give front wheel speed versus rear wheel speed back to the ECU. The ECU can pull timing, close throttle, whatever it wants to do. So it's not legal for competition. But this is not a competition car for the first year. This is going to be a development car. So there's 4 wheel speed sensors all the way around this car, all give feedback directly back to the ECU. And with Jay, he was just like, let's just add them. Let's just see. Let's just use it as a learning experience. And like anything, especially with this ECU, there's going to be some learning with being able to do Wi-Fi, talking to the ECU Wi-Fi. The fact that it was funny. In the new Voodoo Pro box, it included a GPS sensor. So then you have the ability to have GPS mapping, GPS. So I don't know, it's gonna be a learning experience for me as well, but that just goes to show like, if we could have that piece of electronics, we put it on this car. This car also has shock potentiometers on all 4 corners. So what the shock potentiometers allow you to do is dial in the shocks from a driver standpoint, but also the crew. So normally the driver would be like, I feel this. But the crew might say like, does he actually know what he's talking about? This way we'll be able to plug in, look at the shaft speed, how much it's traveling, is the car hitting the bump stops, is it not hitting the bump stops, is it moving? And on a car like this where I have no idea where the spring rates are gonna be, I put him at a place where I jumped on the car and I'm like, all right, it feels pretty good. Like, you know, you jounce the car on the door bar and I'm like, feels like how a drift car should, but I don't know, you know, we'll see. But the data on this car will tell us, yes, that rear shock, that rear spring is correct. That front, not at all. Front's not moving, it's planted. So we'll actually have the data to back that up. We also have a steering angle sensor on this, which is kind of a strange one. It's a string pot from AIM that wraps around the steering shaft, and as you turn one direction, it pulls it. As you turn the other direction, it retracts it. So we'll actually be able to see, all right, in this instance, when I did this, this happened. And then that'll be able to confirm like, oh, no, Matt, you just screwed up and you were at too much angle. You had too much wheel into the car. Because then we can compare how much actual steering angle versus body angle the car has based off of spotter feedback, GPS, what I'm saying, but then also the steering angle sensor. Something that is kind of a unheard of with drift cars specifically is brake pressure sensors. So this car has front brake pressure, rear brake pressure, hand brake pressure. Yeah, and clutch pressure sensor too. So all of the sensors live right up in here inside the dash, and it'll allow me as a driver to say like, no, when I got on the gas, this is what I was feeling. Obviously, the ECU knows where the TPS was at. You have accelerator pedal sensor, and you also have the throttle body sensor. So depending on what the driver is inputting, making sure that the car and the engine is giving it what it wants, but you'll actually be able to say like, no, as soon as I got off the handbrake and got on the throttle, this happened. And then your crew can be like, yep, that did. Or, nope, you're a liar, Matt. You were still on the handbrake when you got on the gas, and that's why you broke the axle. Yeah, exactly. This thing has a reverse camera. So right there. So we have a reverse camera that it's cool because it's wired into the gear position sensor. So there's a gear position sensor on the transmission that also talks to the ECU. So we'll be able to do boost by gear, nitrous by gear. Something that I implemented in the C6 is actually a nitrous by gear. So if I want nitrous in this gear, but I don't want it in that gear, we can do it. So the same strategy can be had to this car, because when you actually spray nitrous, it's powerful for sure. Even if you PWM or you have multiple stages, sometimes you just don't need nitrous. So the gear position sensor it goes directly to the ECU and they can talk, and then that also feeds data to the digital dash and the rear view camera. So when I click reverse, the whole dash turns to the rear view camera, and then I don't even need these mirrors. pretty cool, pretty cool. Yeah, that was another thing too, is having the gear position talk to the ECU. That was a new one. On my old car, I had to actually run wires because we didn't build the car that way. But this is built that way. It also has track temp sensor. The track temp sensor is, oh, way more sensors, hold on. There's a sensor right there that is basically, it's one of AIM's UTV belt temp sensors. So it's a really cool small sensor with a pretty good, like, eye, I guess they call it, like the array where it measures. And that is on the bottom, so I can actually see what the track temp is. And I'll tell you, I have it displayed on my dash based off of the track temp. Because there's times where I'll be like, all right, the track temp is 72 degrees. I want this map on the ECU, we want these tire pressures, and I know I need to do this style of tire warm up before we go. But then later on in the day, when track temp's 110 degrees, maybe I want a different map on the ECU. Maybe have a different strategy, how to save tires, how to drive, where to maximize grip. And so that's a big thing that I have right in the middle of my dash, which kind of leeways us to, this car has 4 tire temp sensors. So we were some of the early people to put tire temp sensors in the back of the car, so that when you leave the line, you know, because I'm sure a lot of you know, you see us do our warm up, we got 20 seconds to get the car up to temp, brakes warm, tires warm, ready to go. So within that seconds, we all have our little rituals that we do and how much we scrub the front and how much we scrub the rear. But why are we doing that? What are we shooting for? Most people just shoot for a feeling of comfort. But with us, I'm trying to quantify something and truly have it be a number that I'm shooting for. When I leave the line, I want the tires to be 185 degrees. That's what I shoot for. And with this car, I actually added front tire temp sensors that are right here on the headlight bracket, pointing right at the front tires, so that when I'm scrubbing the fronts, now I'll know, oh, okay, front tire temps need to be 120 degrees, otherwise it's trash. Also, like, this car has a digital nitrous pressure sensor as well. That's pretty common, but that allows the ECU to see that the arm button is on. So that means that the ECU is in its nitrous map mode, which will also then tell the PDM to turn on the bottle heater. So then the bottle heater is self-regulated based off of pressure. And then we also will add in another factor that depending on altitude, we might change our bottle pressure engagement. And we're only able to do that because we have the sensors that will be able to talk to the ECU and see what kind of bottle pressure drop that we have throughout the run, because all of that needs to be calculated and taken into account. But it's one of those things, right? I have amazing partners between Link and AIM and J at Black Tracks. I have some of the best team out there. I really do feel like that. So when they say, hey Matt, we also have this, are you interested? I'm like, yeah, I'll figure out how to use that. Then I asked Jay, hey, is this something that we can do? Absolutely it is. And then he'll talk to Forrest or Jason back at Link and kind of brainstorm, like, this is how we can implement it. This is how we can layer it on that. Oh, another thing on this car, like, that's electronic power steering. So that's new for me. Normally I'm a very traditional man. I have a rack that needs fluid. I have a power steering pump that spins on the engine. It gives pressure to the rack, you have power steering, very simple. With the C8 rack, it's an electronic rack, but we steered away from that because we wanted to do something more traditional that I knew worked well. I didn't want to be tuning the rack for feedback and really digging myself into a deep grave. So it's a C6 steering rack because we had to move the steering rack anyways because we shifted the wheels forward. CAD Chris from Part Shop Max, we had to shift the wheels forward to have rear angle clearance. Has 65 degrees of steering angle, so that's insane. Part Shop Max killed that. But what's on the technical side is that the power steering pump is a CAN-controlled, variable speed, variable assist power steering pump. So it's a Dodge pump, very specific, Dodge Jeep this year, Magnum this year, whatever, right? I don't know exactly the years for that. But my buddy Tyson at Hang Tight, him and his business partner actually created a CAN box that is an external box that has power wires running to it, but also has its own CAN controlled network that you can plug into and tune. So you can in turn kind of have a potentiometer that you can tune your power steering with, which is great for a car like this, because I have no idea how much assist. Where normally we would have a mechanical power steering pump, and if we want to change the assist, got to change the jet. Or if it's size this big, too big. Or if it's size this small, too small. We have to be physically changing jets, making a giant mess. But with this Hang Tight system, we can literally change the assist just with either a laptop or a click of a switch. And here, I'll show it to you guys right here. It's a relatively simple unit. And what's cool about this is that this one actually has an integrated reservoir, so I'm not running an external reservoir anywhere. You give it power ground. This is a CAN network. Their control box is right inside, and then obviously between the ECU or the PDM could both control the assist based off of that. Another thing, electric water pump. So on the actual engine, you'll see there's just a ARE dry sump oil pump and a DC power alternator. That's it, nothing else. Really simple because the power steering pump is up here and the water pump, which is a new unit from Aeromotive, is mounted directly to the radiator. So you can see that the ECU is there in the middle, and I feel that made the most sense because normally we mount the ECU like on the front firewall with the engine in the front, but I put it on the back firewall because the engine's in the back. So it made a real short run for the actual engine harness loom to run right behind my seat. Of course, a quick disconnect, bulkhead through the firewall, and then then the rest goes to the engine harness. This now has a built-in rugged radio, so again, more power consumption. Normally we all run the handheld, but this thing now has an intercom and radio mounted in the car so that even when I give a passenger a ride, they can plug in their helmet, we can have a conversation back and forth, and I just push a button and the radio will transmit from the antenna, but it's a built-in. It's not having to then remember to charge the radio and you ask your boys, what channel are we on? Like, I'm in control of that. And what's cool is that the keypad from AIM now has the ability to turn on the radio. Everything can happen all right on the keypad. It's really, really cool. What's cool is that we can have all of these sensors, but I don't have to have all of those wires run directly to the ECU. The ECU has its own CAN network where tons and hundreds of thousands of data points can be transmitted back and forth with just 2 wires. So the fact that it has its own network makes a big difference because the days of running a sensor to your ECU and a sensor to your dash are over. Everything is happy because it actually has a network, and the ECU itself knows every single one of these sensors that we just discussed and is able to then overlay and review, and you say, yes, this tire temp created this much lateral G, and this was the RPM that we were at, and this is how much fuel consumption we had.